Welcome to You Owe It.
Wellness to yourself
On this show, we will replace I-ness,
with weeness
then illness.
becomes wellness.
Thank you for joining us today. I am Baba Derek Jackson.
And I am Lydia Bailey Paget.
This program is about wellness and well-being from a spiritual and mental health idea.
When I say wellness and well being from a mental health perspective, I mean balance from a emotional standpoint, from a cognitive standpoint, and from a behavioral standpoint. What do you mean by wellness and well being?
Wellness and well-being from a spiritual point of view, as our ancestors saw it, Lydia, was at the level of the soul. It was at the level of inner peace and your relationship with the cosmology and ecology, or what we call the interrelatedness and interconnectedness that we have between us, the universe, and our earthly environment and surroundings.
I like that. When you say soul, tell can you share like what does that look like? What it for people who are searching or maybe have some different understanding of what soul is?
So for us, um, as we looked at it, based on our narrative, when I say our people of African ancestry's narrative, um, one of the best ways that I found to look at it is look at how did we write about it? What did we say about it? And one of the best authors or spokesperson out there that really gives a good idea of what we're talking about when we speak of the soul is Dr. Marimba Ani. Many of us call her Mama Marimba. And then Dr. Wade Nobles. According to Dr. Marimba Ani, the soul is the essence of the human being from an African person's worldview. It is that aspect of the person that expresses his and her union with the universal order and through it with all being. So, on certain parts of the continent, you're going to hear that word soul expressed in a different custom, but the culture and what it means stays the same. Like for in Kemet, or as some people call it, Egypt, as it's called in its modern context, it is the soul is called the Ka. In other parts of West Africa, it might be called the Okra. Other parts, it might be called the Se, S-E, or the Emi, which is E-M-I. But what I do know, in even us as the Ausa, Africans in the United States of America, to touch our soul is to touch us deeply.
And I like when you talk about culture, and can you expand that a little bit in terms of the culture here as Ausa people in our current environment? Do you make a connection? And you did say interconnection. Do you make a connection between looking at the soul from a spiritual standpoint or a religious standpoint? And talk about that in terms of our
Ah,
culture. Yeah.
I'm glad you made that. That's a good question.
Hmm.
In other words, in African systems, and I do make a connection between our religious and spiritual ideas and ideals on the continent, and the spiritual ideas and ideas we brought here, and religious ideas we brought here to the United States. Because if you the main reason being is is that DNA tells us now from epigenetic studies that we carry the DNA molecules from our ancestors from the very beginning of time. That we, as people of African ancestry, have DNA that goes back to the first humans. And that still influences us. So anybody in your listening audience who want to do a deep dive can study epigenetics and all of the literature that's out there. One of the most profound places on the planet that teaches about epigenetics is, surprisingly, Lydia, the University of Utah.
Hmm.
They
Very
are
interesting.
probably one of the leading experts in that area.
Hmm.
So if my DNA literally goes all the way back to the first human inhabitants, wouldn't it make sense that I would look at the spiritual and religious thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors that they had at that time and see how we are linked to that,
Hmm.
how that is a part of us? And so when I speak of the soul, I'm not speaking of the soul just in its present formation, because epigenetics has to do with understanding the environment you find yourself in at this present time. But I'm also looking at the influence
Hmm.
that soul has had in our entire lifespan.
Hmm. Which is
And that,
important.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so because of that, you once you get a Jackson speaking, you can't stop him. So if you need to
No, you're doing well in explaining it. It's good. Good stuff.
stop him. You mentioned spirituality and religion.
Right.
Our ancestors didn't see them as different things. Spirituality is that overarching, encompassing, that involves the cosmology, that involves the ecology
Hmm.
or environment. But religion is the rituals and ceremonies we perform in order to get to the spirit.
Good
Okay?
answer. Good answer.
So understand that manifestation of religion looks different with different groups.
Right.
So if you went among the Ashanti and saw traditional religion as it's practiced by the Ashanti, you would think it's different than how the Yoruba in Nigeria practice it, because you're only looking at the surface. But
Absolutely.
when you do a deep dive, as I like to say all the time, into what are the rituals and ceremonies they are practicing doing, it is how they connect to the ecology, the cosmology. So you cannot look at them and just see the surface of their customs
Hmm.
and the way they practice it. You must see, oh, that's how they interconnect. That's how they interrelate
Hmm.
to the cosmos, to the ecology.
So, with that being said, how do you how do individuals come to you? How do they come to you and ask for guidance? Tell us a little bit about how that process, how does that interaction work with you when someone comes to you for spiritual counseling or spiritual knowledge? How do you walk them through that journey?
Boy, did you ask a deep question. You know, as a psychologist, that's a deep
It's a
and
deep.
profound question is how you begin. Well, one of the things I do is I just ask them a very simple question. Like the question might start out with asking, what brings you here today? How may I help you today?
Mhm.
And then they will start to talk. And when in their talking, I will listen very carefully to the things they've got to say. Because at that point of telling me what brings them in, um, um, I might realize I need to send them to you.
Mm. Mm.
In that first initial conversation, I can almost tell whether this is a deeper problem than what I can do for them in this session. Now, some people I have to go a little further. And some people I do what is called a soul inventory questionnaire,
Mm.
you know. And you've seen some of the questions I
Yes.
ask in my soul inventory,
Pretty deep. Pretty deep,
you
Baba.
know. And I only start with the first 5 questions where we ask questions like the first questions I ask them is please write in 50 words or less the type of person that you believe you are.
Mm.
So in a couple of paragraphs, you have to write down some things about yourself that you believe you are. The next one is name 5 things you like about yourself as a person. So I'm
Mm.
going to the deeper
Right.
inner identity of a person. I am not going by that surface identity.
Okay.
And then I'll say, name 5 things you do not like about yourself. What that does is give me an indication of how well you're willing to do a deep evaluation about yourself.
Hmm.
Because sometimes it's easier to talk about what you like.
Right. 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 Right.
But
Right.
when we start to get in what you don't like, now there are some clients that can go to the negative before they can come to the positive.
Right.
And I don't want to call them clients. I just want to say some people that come through that door.
Hmm.
And either way can be a problem, though,
Right.
an identifying problem. So, my fourth question, are you the type of person who makes friends easily?
Mm.
And if you answer yes, then what is it about your personality that will allow others to make friends with you easily?
Okay.
See, these are evaluations of the
Right.
spirit. This is not just,
Self-assessment. Right. Yeah.
and then the next B question is if your answer is no, that you don't make friends easily, then what it is it about your personality that will not allow you to make friends easily?
Okay.
So these are the kinds of questions, and that's the fourth question.
Right.
And the fifth question is if there was anything about yourself you could change, what would it be? List a minimum of 5 items and prioritize with one having the highest priority.
Okay. So you.
Just getting through those 5 questions.
Well, I'm just trying to think if I can get through the first two. It's talking about five. So what? So what? What? and I know, and you can speak to this in detail about,
Mhm.
Ausu people and who we are and how we address issues, generally, if it's happening to us or in our families. Do you see that individuals are more likely or more comfortable to come to you as opposed to wanting to be referred to someone like me, therapist, okay.
Yes, they definitely think, because remember, we are raised through, most of us in our community, 90 to 99, well, I will say 80% of us are raised through Western religious thought,
Mhm,
whether it's Christianity, Islam, or Judaism. Those are the three main religions that most of our people use as a sense of self,
mhm,
a sense of spiritual and religious identity. And so I already know the damage that has been done based on that, because we've allowing someone who's been our oppressor to define our relationship with the spirit.
right,
So
right.
that's unhealthy, just knowing that
From the
off the
beginning.
top, from the
Right,
beginning.
from the beginning. And do you find that that individuals are kind of resistant in talking about their spirituality? Because I know I found it that most people don't use vocabulary like soul and spirituality. When you say those types of words, they kind of look at you kind of side eye like, um, but do you believe in God? Do you have this relationship? And so do you find yourself with individuals struggling, when you bring about certain terms and concepts, do they struggle with understanding the differentiation between the interconnectedness to the cosmology and the ecology versus the rituals and the ceremonies?
Yes, they do have some people do. Others, um, they may see it, but they don't feel it.
Mm.
Others may feel it, but they don't understand it. Okay.
Right,
And so they may be in search of trying to understand that connection. How does
right.
that connection come about? So that's why I do this soul inventory, to parse out just
Mhm.
where is this certain person, and that'll tell me what direction I need to go in.
Right. I can imagine you have individuals come and say, I've been following this particular path, but it
It's not
doesn't
working.
right. There's no peace there. There's no balance that we talked about the balance. And
Mhm.
I'm kind of roaming. And I know there's something more, but how do I open myself up to it?
Absolutely. You get those kinds of questions. And then you get the kinds of questions are the kind of searching. That's really what it is. People, when they come to me, they're searching for something.
Hmm.
They're in looking for something. That's why I say, how may I help you?
Hmm.
As a question, because I need you to tell me what you're looking for.
Hmm.
um, and to know what it is. Let's clarify what that is you're looking for. And if we can clarify in our conversation what it is you're looking for, then I can best suit for you. And if it gets real deep, where they are deeply confused, I know I'm gonna have to send them to you.
I got you. I got you.
Because that's beyond the scope
Right.
of where we can go.
And I appreciate you for doing that because I'm not quite sure that everyone is equipped in your position to understand the significance of that. that there's something else that's heavier there that needs to be uncovered. And with that being said, why don't you share a little bit about how your own experience and your own personal journey has brought you to your current understanding and acknowledging the importance of the spirit and spiritual wellness and
Wow,
well-being.
that's deep.
We come to make you think on this show. We want you
Right.
to.
Because that's one of the things that I can look back now and see. When you're going through the mess of living in what I call an anti-African reality, America is living in an anti-African reality. What does that mean? That means that there is nothing about this reality is nurturing and nourishing to the spirit of African people.
That's heavy to hear it said out loud.
Let's just think about that for a second. There is nothing in this reality that nourishes you as a person of African ancestry. The only exception is the environment that you're born into.
Mm,
If you are born into an environment and lucky enough to have parents, aunts, and uncles who understand the deep theology of themselves and raise you in that kind of environment, then it will lead you away from the realities of this anti-African reality.
absolutely.
But most of us, we ain't that lucky
Right.
because
Yeah.
our parents have been indoctrinated with this African anti-African reality. So,
Absolutely.
so I'm not blaming them for something they didn't know and
Right.
understand. I'm just understanding that somebody else has been the determiner of our consciousness because they are the determiner of our history and experiences.
Right. Unfortunately, that
That's
is
the
true. Right. And if you're not,
Dr. Amos Wilson tells us this.
absolutely, it's absolutely true. And even if you are in this environment where you are, like you say, lucky enough to have some exposure, it has to be constant. It has to be intentional. It has to be deliberate because once they, like Dr. Amos Wilson say, once they move out of that environment and become indoctrinated from another system, you begin to have that system take hold. So
Right.
yes, that has to be supported consistently in all
Mhm.
aspects of one's life.
And so I wanted to set that up that way before I talk about how I came on this journey.
Hmm.
Because my parents were doing what they thought their parents had taught them.
Absolutely.
So they were passing on to me that loving situation, which was enhanced by the fact that my grandmother, my father's mother, became part of my life at 6 months old.
Hmm.
And if anybody has been raised by a grandparent, a loving grandparent, let me make sure I say that.
Right. That's right. Because I was going to follow up. Now, do we talk about this? It have to be
A
healthy and
loving
balanced. Yes.
grandparent, you
Yes.
find that love is given to you at such an early age. You don't know anything else.
Absolutely.
You understand your world based on that love of and that reciprocity between you and her at an early age.
Mhm.
And we take that into the education system known as school
Mhm.
or schooling.
Mhm.
And if you notice, and I was no exception, that when we go into it, we leave love and go into a hostile environment. But we
Right.
didn't understand it as hostile.
Right. Right.
And that hostile environment we weren't prepared for. So, as any child, you have this enthusiasm about learning,
Mhm.
you have this enthusiasm about life, you have an enthusiasm about community because it wasn't just my grandmother, it was my aunts, my uncles,
Mhm. You
the
had your
people
village.
who lived in the
Mhm.
neighborhood
Mhm.
in those days. And that happened to be here in South Carolina, in Columbia. So that natural lovingness. And then my first grade teacher was a Black woman. So I still didn't understand that I was in a hostile environment.
Right.
Unfortunately, my grandmother took ill, so I had to come back to New York. In coming back to New York, even though I went to a neighborhood public school, um, the environment there was hostile in the sense that it had people who were not of my culture
Mhm.
there.
Mm.
So now I'm interacting with the cultural other.
Right.
But as a kid, you only understand what you've been used to.
Right.
And so when that cultural other comes in and tells you that your way of learning, your way of seeing the world is wrong, and they don't come out and say it that way. It's
Mhm.
just in they have this corporal punishment in those days
Right.
of the
Right.
ruler. And when
Right.
you don't raise your hand, bop. If you
Right.
don't do this, bop.
Right. That
After a
sounds like
while,
parochial school. You sure you in public school?
yeah, we were in public school. But the idea of sit up straight,
Mhm. Pay attention.
pay
Right.
attention to what I'm saying.
Mhm.
And you better not have, even at that early age, thoughts that's different than the way that they wanted you to think about it.
Mm.
So reflecting back, you see, is by the time we reach the third grade, we start not love learning anymore.
Right.
We start learning that life is not how we think it is.
Mhm.
And because all the children in that room are treated that way, we getting certain behaviors that are starting to manifest
Absolutely. Okay.
at that
S-
early age.
Right. So when it comes to, because I'm just listening to what you're saying through the educational system and just in general, um, how right now, 2021, how important in your opinion and through your experience, how necessary do you believe that individuals should be on this conscious quest in terms of seeking spiritual wellness and well-being?
That should happen from the time of your birth.
Mm.
As they say, from the womb to the tomb.
Mhm.
That is a constant affirmation, rejuvenation, regeneration, and
Mhm.
renewal constantly throughout your life.
And do you think we are lacking being taught those skills? We're
Yes,
lacking being brought into the awareness that this is important to who you are as a human?
yes.
Okay.
And that is done and was done intentionally.
Okay.
Because think about it. Could would any of us turn to um, mind altering chemicals if our spirituality was well?
Mm. You going that way? You going that way, Baba? You going that
Or
way?
as they
Yeah.
say in the Christian church, if my soul was well.
Mm.
If I was well within my soul, I wouldn't need that.
Right. Using it as a opportunity to escape or to dull pain or to, escape reality as it is.
Because there's something painful about reality that doesn't bode well in my soul.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
even when we think we don't understand that idea of soul on a deep level, remember says it touches us deeply.
Mhm.
And so we've even got a song that speaks to being well within your soul.
Mhm.
You know church folks sing, and please, I'm not going to sing it because I don't want to hurt you're in the listening audience eardrum.
Right. We want them to
But
come back and listen.
right, many of them know that song though.
Right.
And if you don't know it, I guarantee you your grandmama know
Mama or grandma, you right. Yeah.
it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you never heard it, it's in you.
Mhm.
You feel it. You just don't can't identify what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always joke about in Lydia's world or Lydia's land, I would start from pre-K all the way through grade 12 in terms of touching on mental wellness and well-being. Of course, it'll be age appropriate. Do you think that, speaking of spiritual wellness and well-being in the same way, do you, because you said from the womb to the tomb, what would that look like if we were in Baba's land, and how you would allow that type of language and discussion, how you would interweave that, um, starting at a very, very young age?
Okay. Let me answer that question this way by saying to your listening audience what my dream is. My dream is for people of African ancestry to have 100 years of internal peace.
Mm, mm, that's
So,
that's
in order for us to have 100 years of internal peace, then even before I decide, Lydia, to have a child, I must be developing that in myself.
yeah. So that means that would require planning.
Yes,
That's what I hear,
yes.
if I'm hearing you correctly. Planning.
You would have to plan that.
Right.
So at the moment I learned that I live in an anti-African reality, or what we call today being woke,
Mhm.
or what we used to call back in the 60s being conscious,
Right.
at the moment of that awokeness,
Mhm.
awakening,
Mhm.
whatever terminology you use, then you have to plan for your inner spirit to get healthy
Okay. Mm.
before I even think about bringing another being into this world.
Absolutely. So you know my who my one of my favorite ideologers. I'm creating
Yeah.
a new word. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing speaks of prolonging those types of decisions, or even engaging in relationships until after your 30s. And it makes sense to me. With the brain completing development at the age of 25. And then I always say you need to learn how to use the brain in an effective
Hmm.
way. Um, an opportunity to work on yourself, and then prepare for those types of serious commitments. And, I think the spiritual counseling and the awareness of spirituality, I think more conversation needs to be had around that. I'm not
Absolutely.
quite sure that everyone understands that that is at the core of who you are.
Hmm.
And I am, excited that we have this opportunity to talk about it in
Hmm.
this way, so we can kind of just take away the layers of being overburdened about the religiosity of what we're doing and what we say, and identifying to different religious denominations. It's almost like you're just peeling it all the way and getting to the core of, I need to look at your spirituality. I need to know what that looks like before you go and try to take on rituals and ceremonies.
And everything else you're doing.
Right. And you
Because
wonder
I'm not
why.
even, and let's be clear, neither one of us are asking anybody to give
To
up
give
their
up
religion,
anything.
give up their
Absolutely.
religious beliefs. So let's be
No.
clear off the top. That's not what we're asking
Yes.
you to do.
Yes.
But
I'm
what we
not saying
are
that.
asking is that, well, at least me, from a spiritual and a theological way of looking at the world, I am asking us to realize, to be in a healthy religious spiritual organization, it must answer four things. Here are the four. It must answer the question, who am I? It must answer the second question, who are my ancestors? Third question, what is my purpose? And the fourth question, what is my destiny?
Mm. And you come to the table with that before you engage on how you practice that. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So those are heavy questions. Who am I? Who are my ancestors? What is my purpose? And what is my destiny? Yeah. You're talking about a deep dive and a long
Okay.
conversation.
And I guarantee you that of the 54 countries on the continent of Africa, among the thousands of ethnic groups, that even with all of the colonization that goes on the continent right now, that if I wipe away what the colonizers did to parts of Africa,
Hmm.
but if I was to ask them on that deep level, who am I? Who are my ancestors? What is my purpose? What is my destiny? I'll find very few on the continent who can't answer that. And I'm going to tell you why.
Hmm. Please do.
In a conversation I had with an elder who is now transitioned, Makaru, and you know him also, Elder Robert Kwame Osei Wusu. He said to me, he said one day, In talking to him, he said, Baba, I was born Ashanti. I live my life as Ashanti. And when I transition, I will transition as Ashanti. How many of us in the diaspora can say that?
Hmm. In a clear,
See,
definitive
understand
way.
at one point in his life, he was being trained to be a priest in the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
But despite that training in the Catholic Church, when he wiped away everything else, he understood the who am I question,
Right.
that he's Ashanti,
Hmm.
that he was born Ashanti. He understood who his ancestors were. They were the Ashanti people.
Hmm.
He understood his purpose was the purpose of the Ashanti people collectively,
Mm.
that he is not in this world by himself.
Right. So since that gave him the foundation to do any and everything else that he could do. And we're going back to the Ausa people, and you talked about culture. We kind of, we're making a circle here. And so we are a group of individuals, a group collectively that have been disconnected
Absolutely.
from, our whatever was our original cultural groups on the continent. But even despite all of that disconnection and disruption, we were able to create, you know,
Yeah,
here in the United States and throughout the diaspora, a sense of a new foundation,
absolutely.
which is, I mean, speechless, and do well and thrive from it. But
Absolutely.
I do understand, making that connection with the spirit, in terms of feeling that I'm not quite whole. I'm not quite um, filled up. There's something that that is pulling at me to reconnect or to connect to. And do you see that um, when you're working with individuals opening up and feeling this pull, this sense of pull, this deeper kind of spiritual wanting to connect? Can you speak to
All
that a
the
little bit?
time.
Yeah.
All the time. And that's because Christianity, as it's taught in our churches here in the Western world, is based in self esteem and not self worth.
Mm,
As a
yeah.
mental health professional, you know that those are two entirely different things. So
Two
I'm going to
entirely.
ask a question to you
Okay.
as a mental health professional. And let me say this, the reason you and I have come together because actually, in African theological and philosophical ideas, there is no separation
None.
between the spirit and the mind. We
Absolutely.
only do this way because that's the way people understand it in this anti-African reality.
Absolutely.
But there's
Absolutely.
no way to talk about the spirit as
Without,
if it's separated from the mind.
it is not. Yeah, you and I have had several discussions about it. It is not separated,
Absolutely.
and that's how I operate, how I function. I do not separate the two. In terms of your question, self-esteem versus self-worth. Self-esteem speaks to attributes, characteristics, how one sees themselves. And self worth is about the value, knowing one's value, understanding if they are in a position to experience interactions, relationships in a healthy way, and also commanding, not demanding, but commanding. that kind of reciprocity in terms of knowing what their value is. And I think I shared with you a little bit that I prefer self-worth,
Yes.
because self-worth to me has to be established first in order for you to speak about yourself in terms of attributes. If
Mhm.
if I don't feel that I am worthy of, if I don't feel that that I deserve this reciprocity, that I, whatever it is that I share, that it is going to be shared back, then how could I move to the next step and talk about qualities and abilities and attributes?
Mhm.
So there is, to me, I think you kind of put, I think self-worth should be there first.
Ain't no
Just
should.
by the fact that you are to honor and acknowledge the humanity and who you are, just because I am a human.
I have
Period. I don't
worthiness.
have to explain. I don't have to, go into other details about, my family tree and all these other things. I am a human, and therefore I am worthy.
Hmm.
And that is, I think that should be a priority.
And that's
And then that creates a space for self-esteem.
and that's what the level by which theology should stand.
Mm,
Okay. Theology should stand on the idea that as a human product, I am worthy.
mm-hmm.
I don't
I,
have to have no other reason.
no other reason. No other reason. Absolutely. We agree
It
on that.
shouldn't be based on whether I'm saved or not. See, that's
Absolutely. Say it again, Baba. Say it again.
because whether I'm saved or not speaks to self esteem.
Mm, mm,
But if I see myself as God having a human experience, then I become not only the manifestation of that experience, but also the personification of that experience.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
then it won't even matter what my mama and daddy had in their mind at the time that I come into this world.
Hmm. Absolutely. I like, it's totally simple to me. I get it. Very, you've made it plain. You've made it plain. And we have a couple of minutes left,
Wow,
and
this has moved fast.
this has moved fast. You know how I go when you and I have conversations. And I want you to speak about, because I think this is very much so connected to your spirit. What is it about what's going on right now in the world, the energy that's moving around, um, in this moment, at this time? Do you, and you can put it in your own words, living out your purpose? Do you see yourself clearly living out your purpose?
Oh,
Because this is not a
absolutely.
small task. You're talking
No,
about spirituality,
absolutely.
helping others um, have spiritual wellness and well-being. Talk a little bit about your own, where you are right now, and in your purpose in
And
terms.
in my own journey, I had to see that that was my purpose. I had to have that profound moment, woke up moment,
Hmm.
that awakening, that collision between the anti-African reality that I had been living in
Hmm.
and the reality of who I am as a child of God.
Mm, mm,
When those two things come together, they're gonna clash
hmm.
because nowhere in that anti-African reality am I nourished, nurtured, provided for, and protected in that reality.
Mm-hmm.
In the reality of being a child of God, see, we say in our affirmation at the temple, I am the son of God.
Mm-hmm.
When I was fashioned in the womb and created in the divine egg, the seed of God was in me.
That's right. That's right.
That's an affirmation we say every Sunday.
Right.
So if that affirmation, that way of affirming myself stands true, then it's in direct opposition to the anti-African reality of living in America.
Mm-hmm.
That means I'm going to have to go out and not just say it for myself. I'm going to have to find others and help others to that awakening, not
Absolutely.
travel the world for them.
Mm-hmm.
As one of my ancestors used to say, and she used to say this, Lydia, you can't fix nothing till you fix yourself.
That's right. Or sweep around your own front door
Over
before you sweep around. I think that's
absolutely.
a song. I think yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Another one of the temple rules for the road we have at the temple, and one of those rules for the road says, if you don't make time for wellness, then illness will for wellness, then illness will make you make time for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah,
Because
I
think
like
about
that
it,
saying. Yeah.
if you got a bellyache, you ain't got time for nothing else
Nothing else. Right.
until you
Right.
fix it. Then that
Right.
illness will force you to make time.
Right.
Because you'll lay down, you'll find some medicine, you'll
Right.
do whatever you have. Why we don't think the same thing in our spirit is true, and why
Hmm.
we don't think the same thing in our mental health is true.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I totally agree. And I tell, and you and I've had this discussion. You don't have to wait until a crisis. Let's you are your most valuable, going back to self-worth. You are your
Right,
most valuable entity. Why don't we take care of it? Don't you change the oil in your car?
right,
Don't you rotate the tires?
right.
Um, in order for your car to stay functioning, why don't you think about it, in terms of your spirituality and your mental health? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Final
Um,
thoughts, final words of wisdom.
in my final words, I would like to give you those rules of the road. Our rules of the road says that if you don't fix yourself, you can't fix nothing till you fix yourself. That's the way it goes. Okay.
Hmm.
The next rule is if you do not go after what you want,
Hmm.
you'll never achieve it.
Mm.
The next rule says if you do not ask, the
Mm.
answer is always no.
Always.
The,
Always.
the next rule says if you do not step forward, you'll always be in the same place.
Absolutely.
And let me give you the correct of the last one. And I kind of paraphrased it and messed it up. But it
Mm.
actually says if you don't make time for wellness, then you will be forced to make time for illness.
Yeah, that's it. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful insight. And I want you to go back to the beginning to make sure that everyone is clear from your point of view and where you're speaking from, just so people can really have it kind of marinate with them in terms of what is spirituality and the importance of spirituality to one's wellness and well-being.
Spirituality, in the formal definition we use at the temple, is called the belief that all elements of the universe are of one substance, spirit, and that all matter is a differentiation and manifestation of the God force. That even when I look at a rock or a pebble, I'm
Hmm.
looking at a manifestation of the God force,
Hmm.
right? When I
Right.
look up at the sky, I'm looking at a manifestation of the God force. Even when I look at a cockroach,
Hmm.
I'm looking at a manifestation of the God force. But religion, when we talk about religion, religion is a cultural system of behaviors, practices, worldviews, sacred texts, holy places, ethics, morals, principles, values, and societal organization that relates humanity to what our ancient ancestors called the order of existence. How does all of those things relate to the cosmos, relate to the ecology, what we call nature? How does it relate to me and you? But more importantly, how does it relate to your self, your well-beingness,
Hmm.
your wellness?
I appreciate that. I appreciate you explaining it and sharing your insight. I agree that, we in the Ausa communities and we of the Ausa community are in a time and space for us to move forward, and develop and reach a level of wellness and well-being, be it mental health or spirituality. And so I am ever grateful for the opportunity to listen to your insight and have others listen to share this insight with someone, because I know there are people out there that are wondering what it is that, how can I be more? How can I grow? So I appreciate that. Thank you
And
so
with
much.
others.
Hmm.
The most important thing is in African spirituality, you cannot do it alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There is
And it's
no
important
going
to
off
us.
into the mountains,
No,
hanging out
no.
there by
And that's
yourself.
and that speaks to who we are as a people. We've always
Absolutely.
been one.
A
I've always said that
collectivity.
we are a community. We think
Yes.
collectively. We're not
Hmm.
individual. We don't do things outside of our village and our community. And I think by you saying it, I think that kind of highlights the importance of us getting back to community. I break down community, commune, and unity. That's that's a group.
Right.
There's no individuality in that.
Mm.
So,
And in fact, the way I break it down is common unity.
mm,
See, and it means people who are united in a common interest.
I love it. I love it. Write that down. I love it. People united with a common interest. I love it. Yeah,
So the
absolutely.
question becomes, what is the common interest that unites us?
Mm,
And
mm.
for me as a priest, it's at the level of the soul.
Ashe. Ashe. Ashe.
So it doesn't matter what your religious practice is,
Has nothing to
because
do with it.
it has nothing to do with it. I'm talking about at the level of the soul. That's what unites us, and that should be our common interest, to find peace. Remember, I want 100 years of internal peace.
Your dream. I like it. Ashe.
I say, thank you
Thank you.
for asking me all of these questions. And so we want to thank everyone for listening in to Baba Derek Jackson,
Lydia Bailey Paget.
and you owe it.
Wellness to yourself.
See you next time. Ashe.
Ashe.